Leilui Shama for Rafael Edmond Ezra Ben Esther Yaakov Alav Shalom. We should be zocheh to build this Bet Knesset and the Torah Center that it has become into a source and a beacon of light for all of Am Yisrael, not only here but around the world. The Gemara in Shabbat on page Chaf Aleph Amud Bet asks a question: Mai Chanukah? What is Chanukah? I'm just going to read you the Gemara. The Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught, Bechafhe Becheslev, on the 25th of Kislev, Yom de Chanukah Timanya Inun. On the 25th of Kislev, the days of Chanukah are 8. Delo misped b'hu, that we don't do a eulogy during that time. Udelo lihit'anot behon, and we don't fast on those days. These are days which are days of joy. They cannot be marred by a funeral. At a funeral, if they would not do a eulogy, and they would not make a fast day on these days. For when the Greeks entered into the Hechal, the Bet HaMikdash, they rendered all of the oil in the Hechal, they made it impure. And when the house of the Chashmonaim rose to power and became strong, they victorious over them. Badku, they looked, they only found one vial of shemen, of oil, that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol on it. There was only enough in it to light for one day. A miracle happened. They were able to light from that vial of oil 8 days. The next year, Kivaum, they instituted Vasaum, and they did those days as Yamim Tovim, as a holiday, Behalel B'hoda'ah, with great praise and thanks to Borei Olam. Now there are many questions on this Gemara. The most famous question that we need to begin with is the question of the Bet Yosef. The Bet Yosef asks if there was 1 day's worth of oil and it lit for 8 days, how many extra days did it burn? It burnt for 7 extra days. So the miracle was 7 days. So we should have Chanukah for 7 days and not 8. The most famous question on Chanukah. Okay. The second question we have to ask on this Gemara is, what does it mean, L'shana acheret, that the next year they instituted it? Why did they wait a year to institute the holiday of Chanukah? Immediately upon seeing this miracle, they should have made a holiday. Second question. Third question. If you look in the story over here, it actually doesn't mention any of the taking over of the Yevanim. It doesn't mention the Gezerah of the Yevanim. It doesn't mention the victory against the Yevanim. It just makes it sound like these random Greek dudes from some frat house were walking through the Bet Yushalayim streets. They walked in and made the shemen impure on some drunken, initiation thing to Phi Beta Kappa or whatever. And nothing else is mentioned about the Yevanim or about the kingdom over here. It just sounds like there was impure oil. The Jews had nothing else to do but light from this one vial, and that's it. With all of these questions, perhaps we can employ an idea that I learned when I was in yeshiva. And the idea is as follows. If you have one question, answer the question. A second question, answer the second question. But if you have a few questions, realize that you don't need to answer the questions. You need to challenge your initial assumption. And maybe the way you understand what you understand is flawed, and that's why you have so many questions. My friends, I'd like to perhaps challenge what it is that we are celebrating and what it is that we are looking to take from this magnificent holiday. I want to start with the words of the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai begins and he says as follows. Our last question, why do we wait to celebrate it until the next year? He says, V'nir ali, and it seems to me, B'siyata d'shmaya. The first year, they did celebrate it. They made 8 days of a holiday every day that the candle burned. They did an extra, wow, miracle, Yom Tov, miracle, Yom Tov, miracle, Yom Tov. But you know what? When they made that holiday, they thought that that was going to be a one-time thing. They thought, today we had a miracle, today we celebrate the miracle. The Jewish people, if we had a holiday for every miracle that ever happened to us, we would have no days that were not holidays. You know, you'd walk into work, tell them, so I'm Jewish, I'm going to need all the days off. When are you going to come to work? Never. Maybe Xmas. How do you know that you institute this day as a holiday forever? Says the Ben Ish Chai that when the next year came around, they could feel that there was something, a spiritual power which was latent in the days, a power that was reminiscent of what had gone on the year before. And they understood that this wasn't a one-time miracle. This was an all-time miracle. And that's why the language is, Lishana Acheret, not the next year, Asaum, they made Yom Tov. They'd already made a Yom Tov. But rather, Kivaum, they instituted it. They entrenched this holiday. My friends, from the Ben Ish Chai, we are understanding something incredible. That the Jewish people, the Chachamim, when they were Kovea the day, what does it mean that they instituted it? They could see that in Shamayim, in the heavens, the days of Chanukah were to be forever imbued with this light, with an unnatural, or perhaps better put, a supernatural light. A light that did not belong to those days. A light that was coming from somewhere else. And that was what was causing this oil to burn. Not that the oil burned longer, but that there was a miracle in each day's oil. A day that was going to be celebrated again and again and again. I want to perhaps, according to this idea, draw a parallel from the words of the Ben Ish Chai to a magnificent teaching of the Chidah. The Chidah says that the reason why we celebrate 8 days and not 7, he gives a unique idea. He says because there were 3 things that the Yevanim, the Greeks, tried to get the Jews to stop doing. And they were famously Rosh Chodesh, they were Shabbat, and they were Brit Milah. Says the Chidah, genius. If Chanukah starts on the 25th day of Kislev, on day number 5, you have Rosh Chodesh. If Chanukah is 7 days, you at least have 1 Shabbat to celebrate within Chanukah. But the rabbis wanted that the Chanukah celebration should also have in it the 3rd mitzvah, which the Greeks were trying to eradicate, the mitzvah of Milah. So if a baby was born on Chanukah, if it was celebrated for 8 days, then you would also have within the days of Chanukah the celebration of that miracle, of that mitzvah, the mitzvah of Brit Milah. Now you look at this Chidah and it seems quite clever. Okay, so you got a Rosh Chodesh, a Shabbat, and a Brit Milah. We had a couple of years ago here in the Bet Knesset a Chanukah, Shabbat, Brit Milah, all on the same day. Rosh Chodesh turned out to be Shabbat, and we had a Brit Milah on that day in the Bet Knesset. It's very special. But what the Chidah was trying to say is that the miracle of Chanukah encompasses within it those 3 things that they tried to take away. It seems haphazard, but I think perhaps what the Chidah is telling us, what the Ben Ish Chai is telling us, can be best understood through the lens of Rav Elyashiv. Rav Elyashiv asks, why is it that the holiday is called Chanukah, which means that we rested on the 25th? Surely the holiday should be called after the celebration, not the nap that we took after. Why are you calling the holiday about the fact that you rested after you won? Call it the day that we lit the candle. Says Rabbi Elyashiv something unbelievable. The victory of an army can be its purpose. It can be the end, or it can be the means to an end. What is victory in battle for the Jewish people? Is it purpose, or is it a tool? Our celebration is not to have won. We never wanted to be fighting in the first place. We only wanted one thing, to be left alone, to be able to do the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what was the celebration, says Rabbi Elyashiv? Not to win the war, but the day after we won the war. It is a unique thing to think about, that our soldiers in Tzahal are not professional soldiers. They are not meant to be lifetime soldiers. They're supposed to be people who go home from that job. They become a farmer again. They open up Lechem Chavita Benetanya. They become people who work in IT, who pump gas, who do everything but live lives as professional soldiers. So what was the purpose? It was to remind ourselves, when we instituted Chanukah, was to remind ourselves that this is not what we are. It's not what we aspire to. It's not what we're celebrating. We're celebrating the day after the war. We're instituting the holiday the year after everything is over. The Gemara in Shabbat doesn't even make mention of them, because we were worried that people would think that that's what the celebration was about. Winning wars. Military might. Kochi ve'otzem yadi. That is not what we are celebrating. What the Chidah is telling us now is so powerful. So what did Chanukah have to have in it? It had to have in it everything that they tried to take away from the Jew. The mitzvot that they tried to lessen. What were we celebrating? What we got back. Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, and Brit Milah. My friends, it is according to this idea that perhaps I want to share one last or two last points that I think really help us understand this. The Sefer Vayishbor Yosef says that it's so interesting. If you take a look at what the Jewish people did, they won the war. And look at what we say in Al Hanisim. Ve'achar kach ba'u. And after they won, what did they do when they won? What do armies do when they win? They party. They have a big mangal, a big barbecue. They go home. They kiss their wives and children. That's what people do when they win. I mean, assuming they're a moral army. If they're an immoral army, we know what they do when they win. We watched it on October 7th. If your value is being an animal, if your value is violence, is the predatory, primal nature that you could bring about the animal within the human, then we see what happens when they have a minute, when the battle went their way. Rape everything, burn everything, kill everything, hostage everything. Look at what happens when the Jewish people win their war. Ve'achar kach ba'u banecha. After that, your children came back from the war. Lidvir betecha, to your home, to the Bet HaMikdash. Ufinu etecha lecha. I want you to imagine, okay, Matityahu, Yehuda, Maccabees, Elazar, Shimon, what are we doing? We just won the war. We're going to Disney World. No. We're going to go to synagogue. We have some cleaning up to do. There's a mess. Okay, guys, everyone get a broom. Finu etecha lecha. They became the janitors of the Bet HaMikdash. V'tiaru et mikdashecha. And they started going through the process of sanctifying everything. Dipping everything in the mikveh. Fixing everything up. It's crazy to think that. The Maharal actually writes that you know why it's called Chanukah? Because they rededicated the Bet HaMikdash. But but specifically the Mizbeach. The Mishnah in Tamid says that the Chashmonaim, what did they do? They saw the Mizbeach had been used to sacrifice to idols. So what did they say? How are we going to bring korbanot on this to Hashem if it was used for idols? They took apart the whole Mizbeach and they rebuilt a new one. That was Chanukah Mizbeach on Chanukah. My friends, I think the Maharal's idea symbolizes something mind-blowing in this holiday. It tells us that once upon a time, there was one kind of Mizbeach, one kind of sacrifice. The sacrifice of soldiers going to war. The sacrifice of mothers not knowing if their sons would come back from the battlefield. And that was one kind of sacrifice. But when they came back to the Beit HaMikdash, victorious, there was a new Mizbeach. There was a new sacrifice. A sacrifice to figure out how did they deal with the power that they now had. How did they deal with their victory? Where did the finger point in giving recognition and gratitude for that victory? This way or this way. A new challenge, a new sacrifice was needed. And that was the new Mizbeach that they brought in. But my friends, although we faced then a new challenge, Lishana Acheret. The word Lishana could mean 1 year later. But the word Shana also means to change. Now that they had changed from being people who were broken, who were beaten, who were weak, who were oppressed, and now they became an entirely different being. Lishana Acheret, when the Jewish people changed. You know, you have people who for many generations will talk about their victimhood, about the fact that they were once oppressed. And they live eternally in that victim mindset. But the question becomes, now that you're wealthy, now that you're here, now that you speak the language, you came here from Syria 60 years ago, or Morocco, or Africa, or Mexico, or wherever you came from. Is your story the story that was, or is your story the story that will be? Lishana Acheret. When they saw that there was still that spirit of light, says the Ben Ish Chai, then they knew that they could institute forever a Chanukah, a time which is literally, as the Rabbi said, in the darkness. It's by the door outside. It's something which is meant to represent a person who lives in darkness, who is outside the door, who's not part of the story of the Jewish people. In the darkest of times, we are able to draw back on that knowledge of that time and come forward again. Says the Imre Emet, there's an incredible power to turn from nothing to something in these days. That is the idea, and I will end with this concept of the Imre Emet, genius. I never heard it until this year, and I want to share it with you. He asks the question we began with. If it's only they found a cruse of oil they could light for 1 day, the miracle is only 7 days. Why do we celebrate 8? Answers the Imre Emet, genius. The first day was also a miracle. Says the Imre Emet, look at the language of the Gemara. The Gemara says they found pach echad shel shemen. Now, if you wanted to say a vial of oil, what would you say? You'd say pach echad shemen, or pach shemen echad. Pach echad shel shemen means that it was a vial of oil that had no oil in it. The oil had long since leaked through the walls of that vessel. They opened this oil that was supposed to be pure. There was only supposed to be in it enough for 1 day. But what did they find? They found nothing. And from nothing, they made something. On that first day, with no oil, they were able to light a new fire. And that, my friends, is the new fire that I think all of us can bring on this holiday, the holiday of Chanukah. I don't know about you, but in the pit of my stomach, a light has gone out. A light, a way of seeing the world. A cynicism, an anger, a bitterness, a sadness that we've all experienced over the last 60 days. Our hostages coming back, but coming back with brutal stories. The hostages that you thought were alive that turn out to be dead. The new stories emerging as people are finally finding their voice. Children coming out who finally see their mothers and fathers. And when they see their mothers and fathers, and their fathers are screaming their names, Shani, Alon, and the kids are whispering to their parents because they are still in Gaza, and they are still in a tunnel, and they are still afraid that if they open their voice, that someone will find them again. That trauma has come with them. And there's no light left. But the holiday of Chanukah allows us to make something out of nothing. And that, to me, is more relevant in these days than it has ever been. You look around and we have no friends. You look around in the college campuses and you wonder, where is the place of the Jewish person in this world? And you think to yourself, the answer is that we should be in Israel, but then we hear that we're not wanted here, and they don't believe that we should have there either. Where do you want me to live? Where do you want me to be? Where should I go that you'll be happy? Only in the sea. Only in the sea. Well, my friends, once upon a time, we walked through a sea. Once upon a time, there was another people who forced us into the sea. And what was the end of that story? We emerged from that sea without our enemies, with our heads held high. We had nowhere to go. Not to the right, not to the left, not behind us, and not in front, but something was made from nothing. That is the power, my friends, of the days that we are about to enter into. It is my blessing to each and every one of us that we recognize that without any energy, and that without any happiness, and without any hope, there's still something to live for. And if you can but light one candle, then you know what will happen. One night later, there'll be 2 candles, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5. And when we finally get to 8, we recognize as the chidah that everything that they tried to take away from us, we have it, and they were never successful at taking from us. Sometimes it takes going through a holiday like this to remember that we, our soul, our consciousness, our future has not been injured at all, even though our limbs have been shot at, our hearts have been shattered, and our minds traumatized. They can never, will never be able to break the Jewish spirit. Am hanetzach lo mefached miderech arukah.